James Longman is there. And James, what more do we know about this order from Vladimir Putin?
Well, George, this does feel like it takes things to a whole new level. He is ordering a strategic deterrence force into what he's called a special regime of combat duty. It's essentially nuclear readiness, but it is, one hopes, intended only as a threat. You get the sense his invasion isn't going as quickly as he'd hoped, and with all the support for Ukraine, Vladimir Putin is perhaps increasingly frustrated. George?
It certainly does sound ominous, though, to be putting your nuclear forces on heightened alert. And James, you've also been noticing some more signs of dissent inside Russia.
Yeah, the government is continuing its pretense that they're only taking limited military action, and Putin has been thanking Russian troops for doing their duty, only mentioning the Donbass rather than the full-scale invasion that is actually underway. The Kremlin is really going to find it harder and harder to keep the truth from its own people. Moscow tends to hide the impact on its armed forces, so now the Ukrainians actually launched a website to help Russian families find their relatives killed in combat. That's just one way the truth of this situation is slowly leaking into Russia despite state media control. The economic impact of sanctions is also alerting people here to the seriousness of this situation. Since the ruble sank, $7 billion has already been withdrawn from the banks. Things like electronics are rocketing in price. Car parts are harder to find. Travel is going to be very difficult. Businesses are also asking more and more for cash because they're concerned about their bank accounts. A former Russian central bank official has actually said that things might be a catastrophe on the Russian currency market on Monday, tomorrow, when trading opens. And this is as the crackdown on dissent here continues. One human rights monitor estimates that 3,000 people have now been arrested in protests here. Today is, by the way, the 7-year anniversary of the assassination of opposition leader Boris Nemtsov. He was gunned down right in front of the Kremlin here behind me. The big question: will more people, as so many have already done, risk their lives coming out into the streets in big numbers? We've seen more barricades going up around the Kremlin. The authorities here certainly feel they might. George?
James Longman, thanks very much. Let's go to Washington right now. Chief White House correspondent Cecilia Vega. And Cecilia, President Biden and our allies are doing more now to crack down on Russia.
Yeah, George, we in fact could be looking at some of the strictest sanctions in modern history. What they're doing right now has really been described as the financial nuclear weapon. So they're cutting off Russia from this SWIFT banking system. Essentially, it allows big banks, large banks, to send international transactions. They're still working out the details, but essentially we could be talking about ultimately crushing Russia's ability to do so much of its business beyond its own borders. Perhaps even bigger than that, though, George, is this targeting of Russia's central bank. This is a really big deal because it's targeting this some $600 billion that Russia has set aside to sort of sanction-proof its economy. And on top of that, now listen to this, officials are talking about targeting some of the richest Russians, freezing their assets in the West. And they are being really explicit about this. They're saying they're going after their yachts, their mansions, their mega luxury apartments, even their ability to send their children to fancy colleges in the West. So really, we're seeing the West, this administration and its allies cast this really wide net, going after Putin himself, going after those close to him, but also, as James was just saying, really hitting the Russian economy so much that Putin could be facing some pretty serious political backlash there at home in Moscow. And the point right now, George, they're really trying to push Moscow to this point, almost looking at the Iran model, turning it into a huge pariah on the international stage.
More military aid for the Ukrainians as well.
Yeah, this is a really big deal. That new package, Ian mentioned, $350 million in this latest package, $1 billion total overall in this crisis. Ukrainian leaders had been pleading for more weapons, particularly those that would allow them to target planes and helicopters, Russians in the sky. The U.S. had been hesitating to send these surface-to-air missiles, partly out of fear of provoking Russia. Certainly that changed. The big question this morning, though, is how they're going to get those weapons to Ukraine, given the situation there right now on the ground. And one other huge move to tell you about, George: Germany with a big reversing this policy to not send lethal aid to conflict zones. Right now, they are agreeing to help Ukraine with some big weapons. So that front line there, they're about to get a lot of firepower, George.
Cecilia Vega, thanks very much.